Welcome to your Daily 5 for Tuesday, March 25th, 2025. You have likely, if you follow tech news, or actually, I don't know if this is broken through to mainstream news. It may have, but my guess is not. But if you follow tech news, you have probably heard or seen or read something about the fact that there appears to be some turmoil inside of Apple over the failure of their Apple Intelligence products to meet the standards that the people at the top of the company were expecting. This has actually resulted in a fairly major executive shakeup where one of the people in charge of the project has been reassigned and somebody from I believe the Vision Pro head is now in charge of it. I don't remember all the names because I don't care. But the interesting thing has been what I have seen the reaction to be to this, which is many people thinking, oh, this is showing that Apple is they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know how to conquer this problem, and blah, 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 and everything else. And of course, all different reactions to it all over the place. And as somebody who is, as I've often said, pretty indifferent to all this AI hype in general, the thing that it most reveals to me is that Apple was doing something that they rarely do, which was they were announcing something that they did not actually have figured out. And they don't often do that. This is an interesting thing, is Apple very rarely, in fact, there may be less than 10 times it's ever happened, at least in my memory, maybe less than 5, really, but they very rarely announce something that they are not ready to show off at some capacity. Even something like the iPhone, which famously, if you read about the demo for that product, they really were just hoping that thing was going to work. It was so on the edge of not working, but it did. When Steve Jobs showed it off, it did in fact work. So the fact that this stuff was announced, and in fact there were ads, I talked about one that has since been pulled that creeped my wife out. That ad has now been disappeared, like one of the people who offended Stalin back in the day. So you can tell that there was clearly a miscalculation by Apple, and whether it was that the executives and higher-ups were told and said, oh no, we're going to make this thing happen no matter what, or that they ran into some kind of roadblock, well, that's unclear. I'm sure at some point we'll find that information out. But it does indicate that Apple was doing something that they don't usually do, which is they were reacting to the basically hype cycle around them. I really think that was Apple's biggest mistake here, is that in a rare case, and I'm using that word a lot because you just don't see this from Apple very often, it is unusual for them to react to others wanting them to do something as opposed to doing something when they think they've actually got something to do. And I think that this AI hype cycle even got to Apple, which is somewhat astonishing. It does indicate also that there's a major problem when just investor expectations are driving what a company of Apple's success and size is doing. But of course, that's a larger issue. But the fact that Apple felt that they had to at least do a head feint towards having these AI tools, something that would be comparable to what others were doing, that does reveal something about the company. Now, a lot of people have talked about the fact that, this was a marketing blunder and the rest of it, and sure, all of it was. But like I said, that's not the thing that's most interesting to me, because Apple in recent years has not been above a marketing blunder or two here or there. I've done shows where I've talked about my complaints about their design. I do feel like the company has lost some of what made it special back when I was younger. Not to the extent, look, they're not Google. I'm not comparing them to Google. I'm not saying that the company is on the rocks. No, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it is clear this is a different Apple, and in some ways an Apple that does seem to have, forgive the pun here, not as much of a vision for what they're doing as they used to, or at least it's a very limited one. And that's what makes this even more interesting, that rather than staying within kind of the narrow box that they feel confident and competent in, they felt the pressure to at least say that they were going to be doing something that everybody else was doing, when clearly they were nowhere near being ready to actually deploy any of it. And that is something that you just don't often see. So I don't know if this has any long-term impact. It's just one of those interesting blips out of a company that normally seems to have a very steady course, that seems to know, again, even if they're not doing anything that I think is particularly innovative, outside of Apple Silicon maybe, but now that's been around for a while, they generally do seem to know where they're going and they stick to their path. And this is a case where it seems like they were forced to veer off the lane a little bit. And so that's the interesting part to me. When Apple Intelligence comes, if it ever comes, if it's what they said it was, I really don't care. It doesn't really matter. I don't know if it's ever going to live up to what even Apple is saying it is. But the fact that they felt like they had to start talking about it when they clearly didn't have much to talk about, that's the thing that's interesting to me. And I don't know if it means anything long term, but it's certainly something that's worth noting. Later.